Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Dave Clausen, and I am the Assistant Director at the Illinois Higher Education Center. I wanted to share a quick 2-minute backstory on this webinar. Back in February, the Illinois Higher Education Center hosted a professional development summit, and we invited Officer Ryan Snow to speak on the topic of cannabis. There at the summit, we had counselors, housing staff, conduct staff, and alcohol and drug preventionists in attendance. We had a great group discussion around this topic, and there was a clear need identified. Many of those in attendance knew about THC concentrates, but they merely knew they existed. They didn't know any more detailed information. This was affecting their work and ability to address concentrates. So after sharing this with the Ohio State Higher Ed Center, we decided we'd team up and present this webinar. So a big thank you to the folks at Ohio State and their staff for making this happen. Just a few notes on logistics to cover before we begin today's webinar. Due to the large number of attendees, close to 500 in fact, we won't be able to address questions during the webinar. However, we would like to invite you to still send us your questions via the WebEx question feature. We will be monitoring those questions as they come in, and at the end of the webinar, we will ask the reoccurring questions to Officer Snow. Now, Officer Snow has also generously offered to answer the most common questions for everyone. We will compile those into a PDF document, and then we will email those out to everyone that has attended the webinar. Now, I'd also like to note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available later on both the Ohio State Higher Education Center's website and the Illinois Higher Education Center's website. In 2 to 3 days after the webinar, you will receive an email with an evaluation. We would like to thank you in advance for taking time to provide us with some quality feedback. Just another little side note, Officer Snow will be presenting at the Ohio State Higher Education Center's national meeting. So if you'd like to know even more information about THC concentrates, I'd recommend registering and attending that meeting. There'll be more information on that at the end of the webinar. Now, I would like to turn things over to Kristen from the Ohio State Higher Education Center.
Thank you, Dave. This is Kristen, the manager of the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery here at Ohio State University. For those of you who don't know, we are a partnership on Ohio State's campus between the College of Social Work, the College of Pharmacy, and the Office of Student Life. We also partner with the Generation RX initiative and the collegiate recovery community here at Ohio State. We are funded by the Conrad Hilton Foundation. What we do here at the Higher Education Center is provide technical assistance to all colleges and universities around the country in an effort to improve their alcohol and drug prevention programs. We develop technology to help further this mission. We do education and training and research and development. You can connect with the Higher Education Center on social media via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. And we also provide a weekly e-newsletter that you can sign up through our website, hecaod.osu.edu.
So now I would like to welcome Officer Snow to the webinar. I know, Officer Snow, you put many hours into preparing today's webinar. And for those attending, Officer Snow is a police officer at the University of Illinois and a certified drug recognition expert. He also holds a master's degree in educational administration. In addition to his extensive knowledge on drugs, he has also gained national attention for his community policing efforts, specifically with the international student population. I know he will expand upon his background and DRE training. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Officer Ryan Snow.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Kristen. I appreciate you guys introducing me and doing that. The Higher Education Center kind of approached me about putting on a webinar, and I said I would be more than happy to do that. And so I just wanted to introduce a little bit about myself first. I've been a patrol officer for about 5 years, and I've been with the University of Illinois since 2012. While there, I gained my certification as a drug recognition expert, and so that kind of Was a very long process. It was about 200 hours of in classroom stuff, and then also some practical in the field training that I got to do. And the I guess breakdown of that is basically I'm able to do just a few tests to some people or to somebody that might be under the influence of any kind of a drug. I'm able to do a few tests to them and then be able to identify what type or drug category they fall under. So I may not be able to tell them that they've consumed um, cocaine, but I'm able to tell them that they've consumed some type of a stimulant. So that's the gist of the drug recognition expert. In the state of Illinois, there's only about 50 certified drug recognition experts, and so I'm one of the 50. I also serve as a field training officer within the department. So when new officers are hired to join our team, they send them to me, and I ride around with them for about a month or a little bit more, and kind of teach them how to be a police officer on the campus. I'm a RAD instructor, so I teach self-defense for women and men on the campus, and that's been a really great program that I've been involved in. I've also done active threat response training, so I'm an instructor for that, and that we've traveled all over the state to different college events, to different high schools, businesses, and we've taught about active threat response or the active shooter situations that unfortunately have become more and more popular through the nation. So that's something I'm also involved in. I teach at the Police Training Institute as an instructor, and so that's when officers from all over the state get hired by their different departments. They get sent to the Police Training Institute, and we train them. We train them from ground level on how to become police officers, and I teach lots of different aspects there. I'm um, mostly role play and facilitate the learning process for those guys. And before I became a police officer, I had obtained my master's degree in educational administration. And so um, a lot of people look at me and say, "Hey, you've wasted your degree. You know, you could have been a principal and made six figures and done all these great things." And I said, "I haven't wasted my degree at all. You know, I teach and I learn every single day. I just do it in a different uniform, basically. So instead of a shirt and tie, I'm sitting there in my blue uniform. So that's really how I feel, how I look at my job, and how I look at it, and it's really just an educational experience. So I'm happy I can share that with you guys here. First, we're just going to look at some questions. Um, I want to kind of pose a poll question here for you guys, and it'll be pretty simple for you to answer, just a yes or no answers. If you would, do you have experience with students who use concentrates? So, um, have you had students that came in either through counseling or through your housing, you know, conflict contacts or anything like that? I'm interested to see how many people are actually seeing or having experience with students who use concentrates, because on our campus, at least, a lot of the students identify their uh, use of the drug with just cannabis. Hey, I smoke weed is basically what they tell me. And through more investigation, we start to find out, oh, okay, so it's concentrates. It's not your typical flower or bud cannabis. So I'm just interested to kind of see what type of responses I get from if you guys have actually experienced those concentrates. Okay. And then the next one we have here is, have you noticed any kind of an increase or decrease in cannabis related to contacts? So um, for the people that are in housing and the others that are in the prevention side of things, have you seen an increase in cannabis related contacts? Because what we're seeing with the concentrates is, because of the ease of use of being able to hide them, and the lack of smell oftentimes that gets put off by the drug through the different ways of use. We're seeing maybe a decline in some of the cannabis related contacts, because the people that are supposed to be identifying it are unable to identify it. So we're actually seeing a little bit of a decrease. And so I'm interested to see how that goes for the rest of the country on what you guys are thinking. Okay, let's talk about the plan a little bit. Um, we uh, we want you to understand the different forms of cannabis concentrates first and foremost. Um, we want you to understand that there are different forms and there's different things you're supposed to be looking for. So we want you to learn about the process to consume those concentrates, because some of the ways you can consume the concentrates can be a little dangerous. And then we want you to learn about the process to produce the concentrates, because the different areas of production actually pose various risks for the campus communities that we're involved in. And so that's something that's of great importance to us, obviously, is the safety of the students, not only the safety of the students that are using the cannabis concentrates, but also the students that are not using the cannabis concentrates and are just maybe in the area. So um, we're going to identify some clues of use and be able to identify, hey, if you walk into a residence hall or a apartment or something like that, and you see certain items, it might lead you to believe that there could be some other um, clues of use there. And then identify some area resources, and we'll talk about later about how to maybe provide some extra training, do some workshops, and talk to more people to get some more information on this stuff. I'm just kind of looking over the poll questions real quick, and on the have you noticed an increase or decrease in cannabis related contacts, the overwhelming majority have said yes on that. So that's interesting. Um, so I just want to start off by saying this. Typically when I do presentations like this, it's in person. And so doing it over a webinar is a little bit of different area for me. So I just wanted to kind of caution some people. It shouldn't be too terribly bad, but some of the videos that we have in the presentation, there's just a few, could have some language that may not be appropriate for all viewing locations. So if you have headsets, or if you can shut your office door or something like that, it may be beneficial to you, just so somebody's not walking by and here's some language that maybe they take note with. So what are cannabis concentrates? Cannabis concentrates consist of a number of forms or consistencies, and they're derived of a process of extraction used to isolate the chemical compounds from cannabis plants. So there's a lot of different processes that people can use to isolate those chemical compounds, and we'll talk just a little bit about some of those methods, some things you may be seeing when here later in the presentation. And then the example extracts from the cannabis plant itself. There's a number of them, but probably the most common ones are CBD and THC. Most people know what THC is, but we're going to look at CBD. So cannabidiol is a compound in cannabis that lacks or eliminates the high effect generally associated with consuming the drug. So, typically when people say, "Oh, I smoke weed or I smoke cannabis, I do it to get high." Well, CBD is actually a compound located within the plant itself that actually can limit or eliminate the high effect with cannabis. And so, just recently, actually, in a town, I got an email about a town finding CBD cigarettes at their one of their local smoke shops, and they were very, very concerned because it said that it did contain THC, but it was such a low volume of THC that the CBD actually would counteract it and not allow that high effect. And so that's something to look out for. Honestly, the CBD has more medical related benefits to it than it really does any kind of harm. Where the dangers or the psychoactive effects come in are from the THC, or the delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is very hard to say, so I'll just say THC. Is a compound in cannabis. It just provides the psychoactive effects. So that's the one where everyone says, "Hey, this makes me feel high." That's where it comes from. It is not from the I guess the leafy whatever plant. It's from the THC within that plant. So when we're looking at the THC content or concentration of the cannabis that we've experienced over the last few years or last 20 years, starting in 1990 with just the flower or the bud cannabis, you're looking at almost like between a 3 and 4% THC concentration. And so that's not too terribly high. It's enough. It's kind of like if you talk to the people growing up in the 80s or the 70s and 80s. That's the cannabis that they expect. So if somebody smokes a joint, and they smoked a joint when they were, in 1980s. That's what they assume is happening. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening, because the flower cannabis today, the same style, the same look of cannabis today actually has closer to 20 to 25% THC. So, I mean, you're talking about if you were to smoke 5 or 6 joints back to back to back to back, that's the same high that you're going to get from smoking one joint today or one blunt today. And so the THC concentration goes to play a lot. And so now they've developed the cannabis concentrates, and the cannabis concentrates vary greatly, but they do range usually between 40 to 90% THC. So these levels of THC have skyrocketed, and a lot of that has to do with the idea that the cannabis users are just looking for that better high. They say that they're looking for the high that they felt when they first smoked cannabis, and these THC concentrates are actually doing that for them. That's their explanation of why they're smoking. So what do the different forms look like? Well, obviously everyone's kind of familiar with the flower or the bud cannabis. So this is the flower or the bud cannabis that everyone's kind of familiar with. The one thing I do want to kind of point out, in the upper left hand corner, you can kind of see the little hairs and the little things that, the fuzzies that stick off that plant there. What those are called trichomes, and trichomes are actually they hold a lot of the THC within the plant. So those little hairs are really the things that give that plant the psychoactive effect that it does. So just pay attention to that. I'll kind of get into trichomes a little bit later in the presentation, so you don't have to worry about it too much. The next form that we're looking at is keef. So keef actually is a collection of the trichomes from using a grinder. So a lot of people in the cannabis community or the prevention community know what a grinder is. Cannabis grinders are not that uncommon. And so when you're grinding cannabis, they actually knock those trichomes down off, and it goes through a filter screen in the grinder, and then in the bottom basin area, that's where your trichomes collect. And it's called keef. That's what they've named it. And so keef is all the trichomes, the collection of trichomes that go down there. And the keef, you're looking closer to 50% or 60% of the THC value. The next one we're going to look at is oil or butane hash oil. BHO is a common vernacular for that. And then it has a nickname of 710. 710 is a very commonly used slang for the butane hash oil within the community. 710, it's not very hard. You just flip oil upside down and it becomes 710. So as much of a code as they're trying to use, it doesn't look like they're too tricky here. So the butane hash oil is probably kind of like the gold standard of the cannabis concentrates. It's the one most commonly seen, and all the other forms that kind of follow this actually are just kind of basically a derivative of the butane hash oil. And so that's a big one. So that's something you guys will want to look for. The next one is wax or earwax. It's like I said, it's just a form of BHO that has been performed or produced a little bit differently. So most of the different production value that you're going to be seeing with the wax or the different forms that we're seeing, the main difference is how it's produced, whether it be by temperature, time, or agitation. So temperature, time, and agitation are the three things that really affect the consistency of the cannabis concentrate. And wax is got a very sticky consistency, and it will literally stick to your fingers. So a lot of times, or most times, people will use tools to hold it, as you can kind of see in the pictures, because they don't want to waste any of the product. The next one we're going to look at is called butter. Butter is a form that basically they just agitated it quite a bit more within the process of making the BHO, and it created air pockets. And because of those air pockets, it develops these lumps or kind of crumblies off of the cannabis concentrate. And so that's butter. Shatter or glass. Now, this is the, I guess, highly toted uh, version of the cannabis concentrates. It's said to be the most pure form of the cannabis concentrates. Um, and it should be basically transparent or translucent. And so if it is, then that's what they're seeing. And so if it's, the more transparent it is, the more of a, I guess, soft honey tone color that it has, I guess that is supposed to be the higher THC value and the more pure THC that is actually listed in the shatter. And they call it that obviously because if it is basically a piece of glass, if you dropped it, it would shatter, but it is easier to handle in your own hands. It won't stick to you like wax or butter might. So, how are the cannabis concentrates being consumed? The most common form that we're seeing is called dabbing. So, basically, to your left there, that picture just kind of gives you a crash course on some of the tools that are used for dabbing. And so, they just use the dabber to collect the concentrate from the container. So typically it's a silicone container, and they heat the nail. The nail sits in the oil rig that you're seeing there. And once they heat the nail, it becomes red hot. And once that nail is heated enough by the torch, they take the cannabis concentrate with the dabber and they place it on the nail, which then vaporizes the cannabis concentrate, allowing it to go into the rig and then be consumed by the user. And so that's probably the most common form that we're seeing. And now we're starting to see a lot more of the vape pens being used to consume the concentrate. And that basically is, the vape pens hold a heating coil within them. And so all they do is place the cannabis concentrate on that coil, close it up, and start the vape pen heating up, and that will heat up that cannabis concentrate at such a high level that it'll vaporize it, and they'll be able to smoke that vapor. And so the big issues with that we'll talk about a little bit later. So some of the tools that we're seeing, the dabbing tools, silicone containers, they use the silicone containers because it's a lot, it's a non-stick surface. So with the wax and the butter, the stickier versions of the concentrates, you need a silicone container to hold that, because that's the only way to really get all that drug out. The wand or the dabbers. So if you walk into a residence hall room or an apartment or something like that, or you check a bag or something like that, and your communications major student has magically become a dentist overnight, that is a huge clue for you. You're gonna want to focus in on that and see, exactly what's happening here, because that is a huge sign that they are dabbing. So these are just a couple of pictures to kind of show the process here. So they're going to heat the nail with the torch just like that, and it does become red hot. Normally that nail is either like a ceramic material, and so it just kind of superheats it, and then when the cannabis concentrate is placed on top of it with the dabber, as you're seeing below, that vaporizes it, and it goes right into that rig, and they're able to consume it. The vape pen coil, like I talked about, is just that little coil inside there wrapped around the fabric or the fibers. That's where they put the concentrate, and then the vape pen and the globe. is a big deal. So in the middle there, you're seeing the concentrate placed on that coil, and then they cover it with the globe. That globe is very specifically designed and used in the cannabis concentrate world. So if you ever see a vape pen with that style top, you're going to basically be able to say with 100% accuracy that that person is not using that for tobacco. That is a cannabis concentrate globe. And so that is not a tobacco vape pen. Although the lower half below that globe looks and is exactly like a tobacco vape pen. There is no difference between the construction of the bottom part of that and for cannabis and the bottom part of that for tobacco. So that's something to take in mind. Anytime you see a vape pen, doesn't mean someone's using cannabis, but if you see that globe, it's a pretty good indication. So another form that we're looking at is keef. So how they consume keef is it's collected in the grinder, as you can see in some of the photos there. And as they grind out their cannabis, the keef is collected in the bottom of that basin grinder, and the trichomes collect there. And then so they just collect the trichomes. They place them in a smoking device, whether that be a bowl, bong, vape, pen, blunt, anything really, alone or on top of flower cannabis. So they can actually put the flower cannabis in the bowl first and then throw some of the keef on top just to add a little bit extra THC to their smoke sesh. So sometimes it's even topped with wax or butter. You're seeing that in the lower right hand corner. That's what that is just a little dab of wax placed on top of the keef, and that person is really looking for a good time. So they are going to have a very, very good high from that. It's going to be very high in THC content, and that's what they're looking for. So it's heated with a flame to smoke. The next thing we're going to look at is some of the edibles. So it's just food infused with THC oil or extract, baked like a normal food would be. And so you can take basically anything: your cookies, your brownies, your Rice Krispie treats, your Chex Mix, strawberries covered in chocolate with the THC concentrate on it, and I mean any basic food. So this is where that concealment comes into play. And so students that consume cannabis concentrates are able to consume the drug in such a hidden fashion that oftentimes, if we walked into a room and saw a brownie or a cookie laying on a desk, there's no way that we would know that it has cannabis concentrate in there, unless other things led us to that claim. So some of them you're seeing are packaged and actually have labels on the package. That is not a very common thing to see, except in, and where I'll say this is maybe some of the states where the medical cannabis or even the um, uh, recreational cannabis use has been enacted. They are able to sell these things. They all have different rules. So I'm not able to give you a 100% blanket statement on how they're packaged, why they're packaged, how much THC content they have, things like that, because they're all different. Every state has different rules on that. So, but they can easily make these at home with their own baking dishes, and that can pose some problems because there's very little to no taste associated with THC. So what we're seeing in some states, some instances across the nation, are we're actually seeing children consuming brownies and cookies and having to go into like an overdose of the THC content because their body wasn't ready for it and they didn't know it was there. The other thing with edibles is it can take up to 30 minutes after you consume the edible to actually feel the effects of the THC. So what we're seeing is students that aren't familiar with edibles will eat one brownie, which is an extreme amount of THC. But the thing is, they don't feel it for about 20 to 30 minutes. So they think, well, that must not have been enough. So they eat another brownie. And then we start seeing the extreme levels of psychosis and some other issues that are coming up with what we've kind of deemed as a cannabis overdose. So some of the legal issues that we're seeing, especially, or at least in Illinois, is what I'm really mainly talking to. But some of the other states, you'll just have to check with your local law enforcement or your campus police to kind of understand what your laws in your state may be. But in Illinois, at least, 1 gram of flower cannabis is the exact same thing as 1 gram of concentrate. And the issue we're seeing there is we've got 1 gram of flower cannabis could maybe smoke. During a smoke session, you're talking 1 gram of flower cannabis could probably smoke about 3 or 4 people out. 1 gram of cannabis concentrate could smoke somewhere in the area of 30 people out. And so, the typical amount of flower cannabis that somebody would put in a typical bowl, if they're going to smoke a bowl, is about a quarter of a gram. When you're looking at the concentrate, you're looking at tenths of gram, if not maybe a little bit less. And so, obviously, that goes a lot longer in the use, but you know it's harder to say that they're not using a personal use, because our state at least hasn't identified what personal use amounts are for cannabis concentrates, and it's really hurting our you know ability to prosecute these issues. So how are cannabis concentrates produced? Well, the first two things, I'm not going to really hit on too hard on these because they're probably the least common methods that you're going to see. But just the water hash is just the plant material is mixed with ice water, and it's just agitated to where it freezes those trichomes and breaks them off, and then filters are used to remove any kind of contaminants. This process is extremely long. You can go through 5, 6, 7 filters of refreezing it and refiltering it and refreezing it and refiltering it. And I mean, it can take hours and hours and hours. So most people don't dedicate themselves to that because it just is too much work. The CO2 oil, the carbon dioxide compressed to a supercritical fluid. If you don't know what a supercritical fluid is, I'm assuming you're not like a chemistry major or something. But look it up online. It's extremely difficult. You have to have some special machines to do it, things like that. Some of those machines can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So most students are not, experimenting with CO2 oil unless they bought it from someone else. And most of the time, that would come from one of the medical or recreational use states. So there's many different processes. Like I said, keef or dry sift is one of the most common, I guess, concentrate that you're going to see out there. It's just the residuals from the grinder that we talked about earlier. So that's that one. The butane hash oil, the BHO, how this is made is kind of interesting, and we'll kind of get into this. So the cannabis is placed, so they can use the shavings from their cannabis, like the leftover kind of cannabis that they wouldn't actually smoke. That does have some THC value to it, so they'll put their their leftovers essentially in a tube, or they'll just put their regular cannabis flower bud stuff into the tube. And the tube has a hole in the top and a filter on the bottom, and they hold it over a Pyrex dish. And what they do is they take the butane can and they stick it in that hole in the top, and they let the butane wash over all the cannabis inside that tube. And so as it drips down, what it does is it takes the solvent breaks off those trichomes and washes those trichomes down to the filter area, and then the trichomes and the oil and things like that with all that THC drops through that filter and into the Pyrex dish. And then so through the use of a heating, like a heating element, they're able to evaporate the butane off and leave only the oil that has been extracted during that process. The issue here that we see is twofold, really. It can leave behind neurotoxins, and neurotoxins are just a poisonous substance that acts on the nervous system and disrupts the normal function of the nerve cells. So the biggest issue here is you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you have no idea that these neurotoxins are there, but after months of use or years of use or weeks of use or however long they're using it, it can actually do some permanent damage to the nerve cells within their nervous system. So after a couple years of smoking the wrong style concentrate or concentrate that's been made wrong, um, you're looking at maybe losing feeling in your hands or extremities, not being able to have your brain function the same way it did prior to the use of cannabis. And so, it used to be that we were kind of worried, oh, is cannabis affecting the production or the development of the brain, things like that. Well, this is science here. This is happening. The neurotoxins are there, and the people that consume that cannabis, that style cannabis, they're getting those neurotoxins into their body, and they're suffering the consequences of that. So the other thing I want to talk about is the BHO production dangerous. The butane especially. The butane has some issues, and so we're gonna watch a quick video on that. Oh, it looks like maybe our video isn't working here. So we will do our best to get that out to you guys. We'll send it out maybe with um, the email that we send for with some of the questions and things like that. Let me see. Oh, we got it. Okay. Can anyone hear me? Okay. Hopefully everyone can hear me. We're gonna go ahead and get into it. So why does that affect us here? So that was done in a lab. Those were people making BHO on a mass level. So how does that really affect us? Well, we're looking at something here. This is a news article out of the University of Montana, where three were injured in an explosion at the University of Montana housing complex, a student housing complex, where a 24-year-old student, he was a non-student at the time, he was making BHO in the University of Montana student housing. And so his girlfriend, who was a student, and her 19-month-old child were all at home at the time when an explosion, very similar to the one that you saw on the video, happened, and boom. Windows blew out, things like that. They all suffered second to third degree burns, and he basically stated that the butane that they found in his apartment was due to uh, him refilling his butane lighter. He had quite a bit of butane in his apartment, and so they said no, that's not true. And so through the investigations, they also found cannabis plant material located throughout the apartment, as well as some broken Pyrex dishes. So another method, probably the most popular method that we're seeing recently here, is the rosin method. And the cannabis product is just placed between parchment paper. It's folded over, and they'll put a heating source, and a lot of time it's a hair straightener, right on top of that parchment paper, and then they compress it with their body weight or some other type of weight. And so that gets compressed for a number of seconds, And then after they release it and they open up the parchment paper, what they've done is just basically push the oils out of the plant material. And so the oils that you're seeing on the left side of your screen there on that picture, that for all intents and purposes is the exact same oil that you would see after you've concluded the BHO making process. And so that has the exact same or close to the exact same THC content that you're going to see from other forms. And so all they do is they take a little razor blade or a little scraper, and they scrape it right off that parchment paper, and boom, they have a pretty significant amount of THC concentrate. And so this is the easiest method. It requires the least amount of tools or other products to use, and it's probably one of the safer methods that's being used on college campuses. So that is something that you can definitely look for. And here's some other things you can look for, some clues of use. I've listed a pretty good majority of some of the things that we're looking for when we walk into rooms, or when we look through bags or things like that. So if you're looking at different people and you're trying to determine what type of items might give you clues that there are cannabis concentrates involved, these are the items that we're looking for. So the silicone containers, the dabbers, the butane torch, the hair straightener, especially in male rooms. If you walk into a male dominated or predominant residence hall or apartment or something like that, and you're seeing hair straighteners, it's not a dead giveaway that they're using cannabis concentrates. I would never say that. The same goes with the parchment paper. I cook with parchment paper, but I don't cook cannabis concentrates with parchment paper. So there are obviously uses for these items that don't go along with cannabis concentrates, but it's just something to keep in mind and look at. The vape pen globe is a really big one. And then anybody that has the butane, you're going to be second guessing that, because the butane, you're looking, number one, it goes back to the butane torch, which is another clue. But the other thing is that with the butane, that's actually used in the production of it. So you may want to dig a little further and see if they're actually producing this, because as you saw in the video, the butane can expand to one can expand to over 1,500 square feet. And so if you think of your typical residence hall, with the rooms set up the way they are, if butane ignites, and it can ignite from pretty much anything, the flip of a light switch is enough to ignite it. That can ignite, and it will ignite the entire 1,500 square feet, which could burn quite a few people that had nothing to do with the production of that product. So this is actually, couldn't have planned this any better. About a month ago, I had a student that left his bag on a bus, and the bus driver handed it in as found property. And when we looked inside for an ID to identify whose bag it was, this is exactly what I found. That's a clue in my world. And so I think one of the more interesting pieces of this is the apple bong that he's produced to smoke cannabis concentrates with. It was the first time I'd ever seen the apple bong style used with concentrates, which was pretty cool. This is his dabber or his wand. If you can look at that, I took a close up on purpose. It's nasty. I wouldn't want anything on that being consumed into my body, but I guess he was using it. And then this is that silicone container that we found associated with it, and you can see a little bit of the wax in the bottom there. If you notice on the silicone container, it is labeled 710, which is, once again, their quote unquote code that they use to hide the idea that that's oil. Well, you're not hiding anything. That's pretty common. So why is it so difficult to detect on campus? So it's extremely easy to hide. We have found cannabis concentrates jammed between book pages. So if you can imagine, as law enforcement officers, we're tasked with going in and searching rooms to try to find these cannabis concentrates. And we don't have time nor patience nor effort to go in and search these rooms top to bottom to the point to where we're literally opening books and going through page by page to make sure there's no cannabis concentrates jammed in the books. We just don't have it. So it's extremely easy to be able to hide the cannabis concentrates when they're present. The other thing is with the vape pens, we're seeing little to no odor at all when they're using the vape pen. If there is an odor, it lasts for minutes at most. And so a lot of our calls stemmed from RAs doing rounds and saying, hey, I smell cannabis. Let me call the police. Once the police are contacted, we go there, we identify, yes, there is a smell here, and we knock on the door. Well, with the cannabis concentrates going through the vape pens now, there's virtually no odor. So even if the RA is lucky enough to be walking by at the exact time the person is smoking the cannabis, it's extremely difficult to get the police there or anybody else that can come there and confirm that odor and be able to knock on the door and talk to the residents prior to them it going away. And so we don't really have a whole lot of reason to be knocking on their door and basically invading their privacy based on maybe a smell that we kind of smelt. So that's an issue. The other thing is, since these vape pens look exactly like tobacco vape pens, I've had numerous students in the last year tell me, I say, how do you smoke it? Where do you smoke it? And they say, oh, I smoke it in a vape pen. And I said, oh, okay, well, do you do that in your residence hall or whatever? And they will literally say, no, I walk right down the sidewalk. Like, you'd never stop me. No one ever looks at me differently because it's just a vape pen. And that's so common to see people smoking tobacco through vape pens that no one even thinks, I wonder if that's cannabis. The issues here are, there's just not a whole lot of tests you can do to figure that out. Now, if you put some drops of this liquid into a field test kit, like through police departments, put those in field test kits, the THC will show up. And so the color will change and it'll give us a positive result. The other thing we're doing is sending them away to the crime lab to have them actually chemically tested to find out what's in there. So, but other than that, I mean, the look of them, the smell of them, the things like that, it's just not there. It's not easily identifiable. So can you overdose on weed? This is a question I get all the time. I'll kind of answer it like this. Weed doesn't kill you, but what happens because of the use of the weed can. It can cause fainting, passing out, extreme paranoia, sense of exiting the body, frozen in time, or the loss of reality. We have numerous things on record now where students are using cannabis concentrates, and we've had reports of students jumping off balconies, thinking they can fly, or they get so much paranoia that they think someone's after them that they'll jump out windows, they'll jump out of cars, things like that. I had a case just a few months ago where a young lady smoked some cannabis concentrates and was riding to I know this is cliche, but she was going to Taco Bell to get some food with her friend, and as the car was driving down a road going about 45 miles an hour, she began to feel extreme paranoia from that cannabis, and she tried to open up the door and jump out of the vehicle going 45 miles an hour down the road. Luckily, her friend was able to stop her and get her, back in the car and park in a parking lot. But that's kind of some of the stuff we're seeing. So if we can, maybe we'll take a look at a few examples here. I don't know if Byron can help me out with this. We'll see.
Did you use great?
I mess with this new Killer Kush, bro. It's liquid. They call it bubbly. It's the new weed that just came out. Pure THC. Wanna hit it?
Bro.
See what color? It's right here. It's right in there.
Is that Pepsi?
Nigga, no, nigga. That's that new weed, nigga.
Bro,
that's that new
what
weed.
Is you looking at, man?
That's that. Let me hit this, bro.
I mean, like, give yourself a chance to breathe. Nigga, is you drinking it?
Hold on, man. Hey, bro. Hold on, man.
Bro.
Hold on, man.
Hey,
Get off me,
hey,
man.
dude,
Get
chill,
off
bro.
me, man.
Chill, man.
Get off
Hey,
me, man.
hey,
Hey, my hair on fire.
hey, man.
My hair on fire.
Bro, you chill, man. That ain't nothing but a vapor. That ain't nothing
My
but a
hair
vapor.
on fire.
That ain't nothing but a vapor, bro. That ain't nothing but a vapor. That ain't nothing but a
My hair
vapor.
on fire, man.
That ain't
Move,
nothing but
man.
a, that ain't nothing but a vapor, bro. Man, that ain't nothing but a vapor, bro. Man, this nigga tripping for real, bro. Yeah.
This is awesome, bro. I've never seen anything like this. What did he say before this?
Yo, can you touch him, please?
Yo, he looks really white. It's like lips are pale.
You can call me Sub-Zero, because I'm freezing niggas! I was paralyzed! Oh! I was paralyzed! I was just paralyzed! I swear to God, I was just paralyzed! This is not good! This is not good! Seriously! I was calling the ambulance! I was just paralyzed! Seriously! No, I can't! I'm freaking out, man. No, you don't understand! Weed is not bad for you. It's not killed anybody ever. It's fine.
Okay, so taking a look at that, you can obviously see that there's some different feelings that people can have. So it's something to look at, to think about. You know, we saw a lot on our campus the ED, or excited delirium, cases that were starting to come out through some bad drugs, and now actually the cannabis concentrates seem to be one of the leaders of those types of uh, incidents that we're having on campus, where we're showing up and people are freaking out. And when we ask them, you know, what'd you do, they just said, I smoked weed. This doesn't make sense, you know. And so what's happening is the people that typically smoke the flower bud weed, you know, when they smoke the cannabis concentrates, it's a totally different ballgame. You're going from 20% THC to 80% THC, and they don't know how they're going to react until after they've already smoked it. And so that's a problem we're seeing. So what can you do to help? The first thing we are going to identify as education. It is the key. So you need to educate yourself first through the webinars. Thank you all for being here. This is the first step to doing the right thing as far as educating yourself. I think the webinars, the in-person training, and the joint training with law enforcement, really try to get your law enforcement on board. We've seen some really big successes with having preventionists and law enforcement join, do a tag team type style training to kind of train themselves both. I've noticed a lot of the law enforcement officers that I've been talking to have very little knowledge on cannabis concentrates. This is big even for them. So you guys are even ahead of a lot of the law enforcement community. So educate yourself first, and then share that information with some of the law enforcement officers that you have in your area. Sponsor training for law enforcement. There is a million trainings that you can find out there where, you know, you can be able to sponsor some trainings for law enforcement to kind of get them better equipped to handle some of the incidents that they're experiencing on your college campuses. So that's really important. Schedule trainings for students early and often. So get those students in, get them this information, have law enforcement there, be able to provide that prevention slash education portion of this with your law enforcement, build that relationship and show that unified front of saying, hey, we're a team. We're going to combat this together, and here's the information you guys need to know and how this can actually affect you and hurt you. And you know, do that often. Keep reminding them. So request help from your law enforcement. What are the trends in the area? Do you have DREs available? So do you have drug recognition experts in your area that you can call for different incidents? I've experienced a high call volume in my area from different agencies calling me over and saying, hey, we don't know what kind of a high this person is experiencing because we don't know what drug he consumed. Can you come over here and kind of help us out with this? And within a few minutes, I'm able to get there and kind of determine at least an idea of exactly what kind of a high they're probably experiencing because what kind of drug they've used. And so that takes some hands-on stuff, and so it is kind of hard to get with certain incidents or certain people, but it's worth a shot. What kind of training have they had, and how can you help getting more? So will the law enforcement help train you guys, or will you help train the law enforcement? Can you do joint trainings? Can you do a collaborative effort to figure that out, and then meet regularly to collaborate? And so get those trends out of your area and start meeting with your law enforcement representatives regularly to kind of start talking about it. Those questions that I asked you in the beginning of, are you seeing an increase or decrease in these cannabis related incidents? That's big news for the law enforcement, because the law enforcement needs to know what's the trend up in these areas. Where can they provide their resources to help combat these issues? And then request more information from the actual people that are using the cannabis. So what type of cannabis is seen? How much does it cost? Where are they getting it? How often are they using the cannabis? And what tools are they using to consume? All these things will really kind of help us understand what we're looking for, how we're looking for it, and where we should be looking for it. So I did want to leave you guys just with some quick notes here. They're common beliefs held by people who use cannabis. These are things that I hear constantly from people that use cannabis. And so there's two things here that I just wanted to throw in here. The first belief is that the weed is natural. It doesn't kill people. I hear that all the time from people that are users of cannabis, and that's okay. I get it. I get where they're going with that. I understand why they'd come to that conclusion. The counter to that, though, is what's during the growth process to change the natural process can be extremely dangerous. You guys saw it with the butane exploding. The THC can reach such unsafe levels through the chemicals that are using, so the neurotoxins that are being left behind. All these things can pose dangers. And so, the weed, the plant itself might be natural, but the way it's being produced now is far from natural. The second thing is that weed is a victimless crime. Well, unfortunately, last year, 2015, we had a young student at the University of Illinois, Vicente Mundo. He was wrapped up in the dealing of cannabis, and he unfortunately met with two people that day that were attempting to rob him. And he had already met with these people many times. He was the supplier for the cannabis many times to these same individuals, but for some reason that day they either didn't have the amount of money that they needed to pay him, or they didn't want to pay him. They wanted to rip him off. So he got into a car, and one of the individuals was in the front, and he didn't know that there was another individual in the back. And when he got in the car, the individual in the back sat up with a handgun and attempted to rob him. Well, Mr. Mundo attempted to escape and run from the vehicle, and unfortunately, the gun went off and he was shot dead. So that's one victim that we've had, unfortunately. I would be 100% blessed if the rest of my career I could go through and never see that again, because it was a very terrible, tragic experience on our campus, and it affected a wide variety of people. So I'm really hoping we can avoid that, hopefully in the future. So now for some questions, if maybe I can open it up to Dave. Dave, if there's any questions that you've been seeing, recently that through the polling here, if you have any questions that maybe you could open it up and kind of talk to me about that, I might be able to answer some of them.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right. Is everybody able to hear me? Wonderful. All right, I'll keep going. Sorry about that. We did have several questions pop up during the webinar, so thank you everybody for submitting those. Many of those questions, though, were addressed throughout your webinar, Ryan, because you're very thorough. So thank you. There's just a few that didn't get answered. The first one being, when individuals are using the vape pens for nicotine, often they're constantly sucking on those vape pens. is it the same behavior when they're smoking cannabis concentrates out of the vape pens, or will it be a one hit and they're done? All right. Were you able to hear me, Ryan? All right, it seems like we're having some technical difficulties. Well, let's go ahead and just wrap up the webinar, and we will send out all those questions and answers in a PDF document like we had discussed at the beginning of the webinar. We would like to bring your attention to our next slide. If you can advance the slides for me, please, Kristen.
Thank you all again for joining us for the webinar today. Like Dave said, we'll compile all the questions. We're getting a lot in right now into a PDF where Ryan will be able to answer those, and I'll send those out along with the recorded version of the webinar. And I'd like to just bring your attention again to the national meeting, which is happening August 2, 3, 4 in Columbus, Ohio at The Ohio State University. Registration is now open. We'll have topics ranging from marijuana prevention and intervention to alcohol and other drug prevention, intervention, and recovery. We have representatives from NIAAA, NORC Chicago, Greek Life. The program is looking robust, and we're really excited about it. So if you have any questions about that, please give me an email. The last slide here has Ryan's email address if you would like to contact him directly. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, everybody.